From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. During our first half hour today, K-State's Bob Weaber shares highlights from the recent Beef Improvement Federation National Meeting, where cattle producers as well as leading beef genetics scientists gather to talk about the latest advances in genetic selection and management. Among the topics Bob singles out, new technologies for accelerating herd genetic gains, conducting a genomic analysis using samples from the packing plant, and using precision technology to confine cattle on large expanses of pasture with no fences. Later this week's horticulture segment, where K-State's Gregg Eyestone talks about conducting a light pruning where needed on landscape trees and shrubs. All that and more ahead on this Agriculture Today. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. You're tuned in to the K-State Radio Network. Thanks for listening in for another Agriculture Today. Well, the event we'll review during this segment of the broadcast really has become, over the many years, a tremendous reservoir of information on the very latest in beef genetic selection. The Beef Improvement Federation's annual meeting took place in late June, and of course, attending that event, our guest now, cow-calf specialist Bob Weaber of K-State Research and Extension. And we try to catch you each year, Bob, to take a look back at what was shared at this Federation meeting, because it truly is what's happening in the area of beef genetics.
Yeah, you're right, Eric. It was, as usual, it's kind of the who's who of seedstock and progressive cow-calf producers in attendance. And we were hosted in Brookings, South Dakota by South Dakota State University, and had an outstanding meeting. In fact, one of the best sort of overall programs, from top to bottom that we've had at BIF. It was really great.
Was there a specific theme to each of these meetings, or does it tend to cover the waterfront as far as topics?
Yeah, it varies a little bit depending on sort of the host group, and they're pretty influential in kind of helping put together a draft program for the BIF board to react to and help tweak. This year's the general sessions kind of had themes to them, and then the breakout sessions, those individual committee chairs really get to drive the agendas in those related to their specific committee charges. But our first day's general session was titled Applications of Technology, but it really focused on some of the new technologies and integration of technologies across sort of the advanced reproductive management space as well as genetics. So there's a lot of work going on now commercially available, taking technologies from really sort of the embryo transfer, embryo splitting or cloning technologies, and coupling that up with genomic selection. So taking in vitro embryos from, say, a heifer, producing those in vitro, in some cases with gender-selected semen, so producing bull calves predominantly or heifer calves, genotyping those embryos to determine which ones are of superior genetic merit, and then actually implanting those. So Mark Allen from Transova Genetics. Mark's a PhD animal breeder at Nebraska, worked at the Meat Animal Research Center for quite a while. Has been at Transova for a number of years. Gave a talk titled New Technologies in Cattle Reproduction and the Correlated Acceleration of Genetic Gain. So how really integrating those two technologies. I think many producers maybe said, wow, that's kind of gee whiz stuff. The cool bit is it's actually in practice. So if you go over in the dairy space, for example, many of the AI companies now own the very high indexing Holstein and Jersey cows, and they're using that technology to drive genetic gain for production of elite dairy bulls to go into their AI lineups.
So can this lend to a significant leap forward in selection?
Yeah, and it's really, the genomics tools now, particularly on the female side, generate more accuracy than that cow will produce over her entire lifetime of production. So you have the ability to really identify those elite females as calves, and then propagate those genetics quickly. So the example he gave from the dairy side was, an elite dairy heifer can have calves born via IVF before she has her first calf, which kind of, you got to stop and
get your head around that,
right? So, you take a 4 or 5 month old heifer, aspirate embryos, implant those, she hasn't even reached puberty yet, and you're already putting those embryos in donor dams, and she has calves before she's herself calved, which you got to get your head around that, right? Another sort of interesting talk on sort of out there, if you will, technology. Dr. Allison Van Enenam from UC Davis gave an update on gene editing. So our ability to go in and precisely modify specific locations in the genome. And she covered a lot of the some of the basics of how that technology works, which it's pretty interesting, but a lot about sort of public reaction to that, and then a fair bit of coverage on sort of the regulatory space and how those are being treated as really as drugs and not as meat products or food products. So that was interesting. One of the things I skipped over, one of the key features that we added a number of years ago through the planning of the BIF board was a young producer symposium. One of the things we noticed was the proverbial graying of our audience, right? And which is not atypical of many of the crop and livestock meetings we see around the country as extension specialists. And so we wanted to encourage the younger generation of producers that are involved in many of the seed stock and commercial beef operations to come to BIF and build that network and mentor relationships with other producers. And so we built a part of the program that first afternoon that's really targeted at topics for those young producers. So,
and largely to do with getting a foothold in the business?
Yep, and skill set development to really be successful as a young producer. So Alan Hoyer, a producer and banker from in South Dakota, is also a Gelbvieh breeder, had a talk on drafting your team, which was a lot about how do you surround yourself with people to help, sounding board and advice and so forth. So kind of a little bit of the, for lack of a better term, integrated resource management team making kind of ideas, which was really good. Dr. Trey Patterson, who's manager at Padlock Ranch in Wyoming, talked about building a ranch using data. So kind of what are the key metrics from a production standpoint do you need to be aware of and use in management decision making, and a fair bit of emphasis on a kind of stocking rate and managing of the forage base to help determine appropriate cow numbers and so forth. So that was really good. Tom Field, Professor Field's Paul Engler Chair for Agribusiness Entrepreneurship at the University of Nebraska and a mentor of mine, gave a talk, not surprising the title, Thinking Outside the Box. And so Tom spent a lot of time talking about sort of the motivators of innovation and what motivates us to really be creative and be entrepreneurial and so forth. So those were good points for the young producers. And one of the things that we found interesting is there's kind of a select group of older folks that manage to find their way into those meetings too. And that's great actually, because it creates those connections and networks between the younger producers and the older ones that we really wanted to have happen anyway.
When you have this discussion though at this meeting in particular about the entry challenges for the young cow-calf operator, be it commercial, be it seed stock, what is the standout hurdle to clear there?
Yeah, I think
came out of that discussion.
Yeah, I think one of the key ones really is getting your foot in the door. For a number of those producers, they came in through a family operation. And so they face some different challenges in terms of transition planning and business management development that, a new entrant per se wouldn't necessarily face. The complete new entrant, say if you're grew up in a commercial operation and you're getting into the seed stock business and going out and buying your own land and the capital requirements is one of the biggest hurdles. And in the past, we've had folks come and talk about, some of that transition planning, which is different than inheritance, right? It's, in many cases, there's producers out there that the children of that family no interest in coming back to the farm. And so there's going to be a transition of management and ownership of that agricultural enterprise to somebody else. And so kind of how to build those relationships and find those has been a topic of ours in the past as well.
But is there one next big thing in beef genetic traits that was highlighted?
There was a couple. One that I thought was really good. Larry Keene and Tara McDonald, both researchers at the Meat Animal Research Center, gave an update on their work in bovine respiratory disease. And that project couples really two kinds of data sets. One's the data collected directly at Mark on pre- and post-weaning BRD, but also going and collecting lung lesion scores at a packing plant to identify animals that had BRD, collecting a tissue sample from that animal, and then using that as a source of genomic information to identify animals. So they would collect the animal that's got a bad lung, and then right next to it, the idea was, well, that animal probably came from the same lot and contemporary group, collect a sample from that. So you've got paired samples of an unaffected and an affected animal to go into a genomic analysis. Maybe a little more regional in nature, but a really interesting phenotype is pulmonary arterial pressure, so PAP score, which is the phenotypic measurement to gauge whether an animal will be susceptible to high altitude disease or brisket disease. So, animals at elevation sometimes have right congestive heart failure, and there's a genetic component to that. The heritability is typically estimated somewhere around 0.4, and so a fair bit of work done most recently at Colorado State in that area between their animal science and vet school, and they're making some nice headway there.
Wow. So a lot of diverse topics have been covered in this meeting. Bob, we do need to take a quick break, and we want to return, share some more highlights from the Federation meeting, as well as an upcoming gathering that will take place here in Manhattan that will be highly informational in and of itself, if you'd stand by. Bob Weaber is with us. He's a cow-calf specialist, K-State Research and Extension. And again, what we're doing is drawing some of the standout pieces of information at the Beef Improvement Federation 2019 annual meeting, which took place back in late June. We'll have more for you in a moment here on Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
We're back now on Agriculture Today and in the company of cow-calf specialist Bob Weaber, K-State Research and Extension. Bob is deeply involved in the Beef Improvement Federation, which had its annual meeting this past June in Brookings, South Dakota, hosted by South Dakota State University. And because this is an informational opportunity of such great magnitude, we ask Bob by every year to share what he considers the standout discussions that took place at the Federation meeting this year. So, Bob, what else leaped off the page?
Sure. One of the focus area of the second day's general session was kind of under the broad umbrella of utilization of big data. And a couple of different speakers. One, John Janot with Neogen, genomics company based in Nebraska, talked about the next generation of genetics tools, and so gave us a little bit of preview of some of the technologies coming down the pipe. So that was really a good and directly applicable one for many of the people in the audience. One that was a bit different and I thought was really intriguing was an update on the latest agri-tech emerging in the Australian grazing industry. So the Australians, in general, I think are a pretty innovative lot of folks, but Dr. Mark Trotter with Central Queensland University gave that update, and it grown up in the cow-calf side, as I recall, but had worked in precision cropping systems for quite a while. And like many of us, has observed that the application of those precision and digital tools on the livestock side have really lagged behind the crop side by quite a bit. And so he's been engaged with a group at Central Queensland looking and developing new technologies for precision management of livestock. And a lot of it focuses around sort of monitoring forage production, grass production in those operations, and then technologies associated with grazing. So one of the tools that he talked a lot about was use of satellite imagery data to monitor forage production and forage availability. So kind of managing that side of the cattle business, but then an associated set of technologies that were sort of broadly under the category of virtual fencing. So rather than building a 5-wire barbed wire fence or 6-strand electric, which in Australia, if you think about the large pastoral systems down there, they may have a couple 100,000 acres. Well, that's not cross-fenced very much. A little bit, but not much. And certainly building mile upon mile of fence in really tough country is quite expensive. And so they've been looking at technologies to build digital or virtual fences using, kind of think about it as a GPS-enabled dog collar. So it's got a static correction feature on it and an audio cue for the cattle to learn. And you can go on your iPad or PC and look at a GIS or satellite image of a particular tract of land, designate the area that you want the cattle to graze, go and drag your cow's picture from the paddock they're in to the new paddock you've assigned them to, and the system will move the cows over a short period of time to that new grazing area.
With audio cues, you say?
Well, it gives them an audio cue, and if they don't respond if they are going the wrong direction, it'll give them a little static shock to turn them around, and it takes the cattle a couple of days to figure out how that works. So there's a little bit of training exercise, but once you've got the cattle trained to that, the audio cue in many cases appears to be enough to get, they learn pretty quickly. If I don't want to get shocked when the cue comes, go the other direction. So that was really interesting. There's 2 or 3 companies that are bringing products to market in that area, but a really innovative way to sort of combine the satellite imagery and forage production with a tool to get the cows to the right spot to graze the forage. Because you can imagine in those very large pastoral systems, we want to keep them out of the riparian or wetlands areas. We want to graze remote areas on the station that might be a ways from facilities or water and get them rotated around the right way. And so really an interesting technology.
And that could be applicable domestically in rotational grazing systems, maybe at a smaller acreage scale, but nonetheless.
For sure. And we've actually talked over at Beef Cattle Institute with a group, one of the ones that Dr. Trotter spoke about, to put some of that technology in a couple of research trials here. And one of the areas we've talked about is using it as a grazing control for cerisa. So we can concentrate the animals at a time where cerisa is susceptible to grazing, get them right where we want them, kind of concentrate the grazing.
Forced grazing on cerisa.
Yep. Or, fence them out of riparian areas, all the things that we want to try and do from an environmental responsibility kind of perspective.
That'll be
cool.
Worth watching how that evolves.
Yeah, they're pretty neat
practicality
tools.
Of it coming
pretty
together.
Neat tools. Yep.
Well, what else was on the burner there? More into the genetics area?
Yeah, so a lot of the breakout sessions in the afternoon had a variety of talks on genetics. My friend and colleague Matt Spangler at University of Nebraska gave an update on a grant on building a decision support tool to help producers build customized selection indexes. That's a grant that he and I and a number of researchers at the Meat Animal Research Center got about a year ago, and so he gave an update on our progress there. There's a large project going on at West Texas A&M where they went in the packing plant and identified prime yield grade 1 carcasses from steers and heifers, sampled those carcasses for embryonic stem cells, and took those back to the lab, created cell lines, and cloned those animals. And now have...
Off the rail?
Off the rail, yep.
Wow.
So They've now produced those animals, collected semen and embryos from those clones, mated them together, and their goal was to see how far they could move genetic improvement by going and finding these sort of really extreme outliers in terms of carcass performance. So David Lust, one of the researchers involved in that project at West Texas A&M, gave an update on that project. It's called Prime 1. Some really interesting work and some promising results from that project.
Many, many things going on in this arena, to be sure. But before we let you go, as we're talking informational opportunities, there's another one coming up very soon right here in Manhattan. This is the American Simmental Association and its fall focus meeting. Embedded within that particular program is an informational session for producers, you say?
Right. So on Saturday, August 24th, there's an open to the public educational forum targeted really at commercial and seedstock producers. It'll be held at the Hilton Garden Inn here in Manhattan and features a number of K-State folks, not the least of which Coach Bill Snyder is the guest speaker at the luncheon that day. Dr. Mike Dykman is an emeritus faculty member here at K-State Meat Science, is featured on the program. My colleagues Megan Rolfe and Jennifer Borman, two of our animal breeding faculty, and I really anchor the genetics component of the program on Saturday morning. And we're going to talk really in two broad areas. One's genetic improvement of fertility traits. And so we've been involved on both the male and female side. And so we'll talk about some of the opportunities for genetic improvement on the fertility issues, as well as some novel trait development. So we'll talk a little bit about some work we've done here on genetic improvement of feet and leg structure in beef cattle, but also a couple other topics that are coming down the pipe at us that we've got underway. And our former department head and now professor, Dr. Ken Odie, will talk. He's deeply involved in analysis of some feeder calf pricing data. They've been doing some really interesting work looking at factors influencing feeder calf pricing across the country. So it should be a great day. Events there are free. You do need to go online and register for that. If you just go online and go to fallfocus.org, they've got their own website and URL and everything for it. You can register there for free for the educational program, and that features a full day of stuff.
And you need not be an ASA member. This is wide open to anybody that'd like to attend.
Yep, open to the general public. So should be a great event.
That is specifically on August the 24th at the Hilton Garden Inn and Convention Center in downtown Manhattan as part of the American Simmental Association Fall Focus event. And lastly, Bob, back to the Beef Improvement Federation. If someone would like to review even more of what was in that program, the broad swath of information that was generated there, they can go online likewise.
Right. So the technology is really pretty amazing these days at what we can get captured and pushed out via the interweb. And so there's really two places to go. One of them is, well, three really. Beefimprovement.org is our organizational website. Angus Media, as part of their sponsorship of the event, provides pretty extensive media coverage of the event. And so if you go to bifconference.com, you can find both audio recordings, slide sets in PDF form, and kind of an executive one-page summary of most of the talks that their staff reporters put together for the whole program. So that's a great way to capture stuff. I like the audio recordings. I'll listen to those a lot of times, download them and listen to them while I'm driving to some extension meeting somewhere. A really handy tool. If you're more into the live stream video kind of stuff, this year we did capture almost all of the presentations, including the awards presentations, on Facebook Live. So if you go on Facebook, go to Beef Improvement, or just search Beef Improvement Federation and go to the video link there. You can stream recorded presentations and video for just about every speaker.
Excellent. No excuse for not seeking out whatever was capturing your attention from the Beef Improvement Federation annual meeting. Bob, thank you for taking these moments to go over some of the things that grabbed your attention.
Great to be here, Eric. Thanks.
Cow-calf specialist, K-State Research and Extension, Bob Weaber, with us on this part of Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Welcome back. Eric Atkinson here with today's agricultural news headlines for you now, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, as reported now by the USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service, Kansas farm real estate value, a measurement of the value of all land and buildings on farms, increased from 2018. Farm real estate value for 19, averaging $1,960 per acre. That's $110 per acre, or 6% higher than last year. Cropland value increased 5% from last year to $2,160 per acre. Dryland crop value averaging $2,050 per acre. That was $90 higher than last year. And irrigated cropland value averaging $3,320 per acre. That's $340 above a year ago. Pasture land at $1,390 per acre, $70 higher than the previous year. And cash rents paid to landlords in 2019 for cropland, according to the USDA, did decrease from last year. Irrigated cropland rent averaging $128 per acre, $3 lower than last year. Dryland cropland rent averaging $57 per acre. That's $1 lower than last year. And pasture rented for cash averaging $19 per acre. That's a half a dollar below the previous year. Now, county level averages of 2019 cash rents paid to landlords will be released on September the 10th by the USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service. President Trump's tweet Tuesday morning saying he would provide more aid to farmers in 2020 if need be was followed up by comments from National Economic Council Director Larry Kudlow in remarks to CNBC. Calling farmers patriots, Kudlow said, quoting here, "We are helping them as much as possible. We will help them more if need be, and we will see how the negotiations go." As for the Market Facilitation Program 2 payments, the first installment is to go out later this month or early next month. Most observers agree that the second and third installments of the trade aid will be made, even though the USDA said that those payments would be made only if needed. Meantime, USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue talked with reporters in Minnesota yesterday about the U.S.-China trade situation and about the trade assistance package for producers. Here's more from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
Trade negotiations with China seem to be at an impasse, and China has just announced it will not allow its state-run importers to buy any U.S. ag products. So, can U.S. farmers expect more help than the current Market Facilitation Program calls for? Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue told reporters at FarmFest in Redwood, Minnesota.
There's no other intended plans there. The $16 billion Market Facilitation Program is the plan for 2019. Again, that's the current situation. If President Trump has some other ideas, we'll talk to him, depending on what the market does for the rest of the year. But there are no plans right now doing something else currently.
Are there plans to hold more talks with China?
We're expecting China to come back to the U.S. We sent a team over there last week. The Chinese were fairly intractable in their decisions last week, but they did talk about coming here in September. We want to continue talks.
Perdue said it doesn't help if you don't talk. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
The Environmental Protection Agency decided back in July not to ban the insecticide chlorpyrifos. Now, environmental groups have petitioned the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit in Seattle to review that decision. In July, the EPA said it will expedite what's an ongoing review of chlorpyrifos. In response to public concerns raised, the agency has until 2022 to complete its review. Chlorpyrifos, the main ingredient in Lorsban insecticide, which targets soybean aphids, spider mites, and corn rootworm. The EPA has consistently maintained that that science supports the human safety of chlorpyrifos, while environmental groups continue to say it is unsafe for humans. An EPA spokesperson told DTN back in last month that the agency may at some point place new restrictions on chlorpyrifos. The legal pursuit aimed at chlorpyrifos began back in 2007 when the Pesticide Action Network and the Natural Resources Defense Council petitioned the EPA to cancel the insecticide's registrations. The EPA denied that petition, saying at the time that farmers need chlorpyrifos and that the agency uses sound science when making its decisions. Next up for you, this week's edition of the Kansas Soybean Update. Here's Gregg Eyestone.
Kelsey Olson, who is Kansas Assistant Secretary of Agriculture, joins us. And Kelsey, later in the month, it will be the 4th annual Kansas Summit on Agricultural Growth that will be held.
Yes, we're really looking forward to the 4th annual Growth Summit on August 29th. We think this is a great opportunity that brings across all industry sectors of agriculture, 19 different areas that we address, and it's a unique opportunity to provide a holistic look at agriculture in the state of Kansas.
Because that has really been the purpose of this summit, is to get discussion going and looking at agriculture as a whole across the state.
That's correct. We think this is a unique opportunity where we are not just looking at one individual industry, but we're looking at 19 different areas that range from animal health to pork and poultry and pet food and equipment manufacturing. It's a very broad breadth of all the different aspects of Kansas agriculture.
And in the previous summits, a lot of really good discussion has come out of that, and I'm sure with discussion comes ideas.
We really try to address the challenges and opportunities that each sector is facing in today's economy, whether that be truck weights or it might be a traceability issue that comes out of the discussion, but it provides an opportunity for public and private individuals to join together to talk about today's challenges and opportunities. It's a great opportunity to talk about strategy, how we might overcome some of those challenges, or just join in our passion and our excitement to see a new project continue and to go forward and with growth. A really unique place where we provide input and feedback from all of our different agricultural leaders.
There are many challenges as far as agriculture is concerned, but having said that, there's probably in some fashion an equal amount of opportunities that are out there for growth in Kansas agriculture.
We see that there's lots of opportunity, whether that's expanding a current industry and maybe finding the right community for that industry to grow in, or it's a grassroots level opportunity that someone has the idea or concerned about and that we want to take that forward and present it at the state and national level. It's a real opportunity that everyone gets to come together and have their voices heard.
The summit will be Thursday, August 29th at the Manhattan Conference Center in Manhattan. That is Kelsey Olson, Kansas Assistant Secretary of Agriculture, who joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Gregg Eyestone there. Thanks, Greg. This is Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. Coming your way now on Agriculture Today, our weekly horticulture segment for you. Now we're slipping into the latter stages of summer, and there might be occasion that you homeowners would want to prune back your ornamental trees and shrubs, although normally pruning is not thought of at this point of the season. But there may be a good cause for doing so, and we'll talk about the techniques for going about that now with Gregg Eyestone. Gregg is the Riley County Extension Horticultural Agent. Gregg, what we're talking about here is cosmetic correction, so to say, of trees and shrubs, right?
Yeah, that's right. With the ample moisture we had this spring, and maybe some people out there watering and fertilizing, you may get some extra growth that doesn't fit into your landscape as well as you'd like it. And so we want to do some light pruning as we're getting into the later stages of the growing season so that we don't push a lot of new growth that can get injured as we get into more freezing temperatures. Maybe more cosmetic issues for you down the road and next spring if you have some dead growth that was initiated here in the fall from some pruning.
Right. And what we're talking about here, if, say, a shrub is starting to encroach on a walkway or maybe combating other adjacent shrubs too aggressively, these are the circumstances where pruning would be in order.
Yeah, if it's in the way, causing issues, maybe growing into another plant, so they're competing with each other. You want good airflow typically through plant material. So you can do some, again, light pruning. And generally speaking, on trees and shrubs, this is kind of a year-round strategy. Only taking out a third of that plant won't cause a lot of issues for the plant, but probably want to even do less at this time of the year and save some of that more extensive pruning for during the dormant season or right after bloom time, depending on the use of the plant. Again, if you're pruning at this time of the year for some of our spring flowering plants, you're removing the flowers, and if that's of something of real interest for you for that plant, you'd want to do some light pruning to not avoid those flowers.
And that seems to be one of the key matters of interest. You need to know what wood is going to bloom next year before you prune it out, if that is in fact going to be a concern.
Yes. Anything that blooms probably before June is something that blooms on growth that occurred during the summer season. And so just take that into consideration. Of course, it's not a plant health issue by any means, but it's your aesthetic use of that particular plant. And sometimes we're doing some pruning to kind of lower the height of plants at this time of the year or other times of the year. And that's something you want to ponder on for a while and see if this plant actually is serving its purpose. If it's every year annual pruning to make it smaller, maybe that's just not the right plant for that particular location and growing conditions. So you may want to reconsider as we get in the fall, winter season, your landscape and its use, and whether you want to maybe make some adjustments or replacing plants with ones that are more suited for that particular use.
So, Gregg, the homeowner has made the decision, I'm going to trim that shrub back. Pruning technique, similar to what we would normally do at other times of the year?
Yes, the plant has growing points on it, and so we always want to prune back to a growing point so that plant can go ahead and either seal over or adjust how it needs to. You think of the dead points of particularly evergreen plants. You can prune back too far. There's no growing points there for it to fill back in, and typically dead stubs and things like that, those are the growing points that don't exist. And so we want to prune back to another bud or another branch, and so that that plant can respond by sealing over the wound, preventing perhaps insect or disease issues from encountering there. Broadleaf plants, trees and shrubs, they have growing points either at the very tips or they get larger around. And so, again, you want to prune back to those locations. If you have a larger branch that you're trying to manage, typically something that is probably bigger than we want to do with one cut, we want to go ahead and prune it off in 3 steps. We make an undercut, maybe a foot away from where your final cut will be. That's going to prevent some bark tearing. Then we cut a little bit farther out from there, from the above portion. That will snap that branch off pretty easily without doing any damage to your trunk. And then you go back to that branch collar. That is the growing point of our tree, and so you'll see maybe a swollen area closer to the trunk, and we prune right outside that, and that way that will go ahead and seal over with the active cells that will do that and not leave a dead stub area.
You want a clean cut. And again, as you're referring, trees can be pruned at this time of the year as well if you have those low-hanging branches that keep taking your hat off when you're mowing.
That's right. Those things get in the way and get frustrating for people, and so we do want to go ahead and manage those so they're cooperating with whatever efforts we're trying to achieve. But again, we want to prune back to a growing point and not just go out there and hazardly chop off things that may be issues for the plant to deal with later on.
Now, Gregg, if you've a shrub that individual branch pruning would not be practical, can you use a hedge trimmer to clean it back, so to speak?
There are like shearing methods that are out there, and that's just a management strategy that you're going to have to manage for the long term. It's not a one-time kind of a situation because, again, when you're shearing something like that, you're making a lot of wounds and a lot of growing points, and the plant's going to adjust by replacing materials there, so you get this kind of real heavy growth at all those different pruning areas, and so that's something you're going to have to manage on a long-term scale. If that is your strategy, we do want to make sure that the top of the plant is narrower than the bottom. Otherwise, you'll get empty spaces. There's no light penetration to the lower portions, and so you get naked legs, if you will. That's the situation. Then you need to make that narrower at the top to get sunlight down there.
An important point there. Post-pruning, any special care required?
I would just say good plant health. Continue to water if we get into dry periods. Typically, our soils have adequate nutrient capacity for plants. Soil tests would indicate if we needed to add something, but typically that's done if we need to do that during the dormant period. So we'll wait till our frost, and we could put some fertilizer down if needed, or wait till next spring before new growth starts. But basically, water is really our real health care technique that we can do for any of our plants, given it the adequate amount of water.
Once more, though, homeowners need not be hesitant about conducting this kind of pruning to get rid of the annoyances that might be out there or the problems in plant competitiveness. This is a great time to do this, Gregg.
You can do it any time of the year. Just want to do some light pruning now at this time of the season and do the heavy pruning come springtime.
Very well. Good tips. We appreciate you coming by and sharing those. Thanks so much.
It's always my pleasure, Eric.
That from Gregg Eyestone. Gregg is the Riley County Extension Horticultural Agent. Once more, late summer pruning of landscape ornamentals. Our topic on this week's K-State Horticulture segment. And our thanks to you for being along with us. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.